Welcome back to Bite Size Magic. My name is Zach. Today, I'm sitting down with VarrakS and Kyzr. These are two cEDH players in the space who are very keen on their politics and some would call negotiation. We're going to be going into the 7 tricks that you can use to make your political game the best it'll ever be. The focus of this will be a book called Getting to Yes and the 7 tips and tricks that it employs in negotiation. This was used in the Harvard Negotiation Project, so we're going to learn how these skills can be applied to cEDH. Real quick, I want to talk about some tournaments that we're going to be going to in the near future. The first one, the one that I'm really excited to talk to you about, is Misplay on the Lake. This is going to be an event in Ohio on April 18th and 19th, hosted by Better Plays Gaming. The exciting part about this tournament is I will not be playing, I'm actually going to be casting. So this is going to be the first big event that the Bite Size team is going to produce and cast. So we're going to be following in the footsteps of MTG Basics and giving you our casting experience. So super pumped to have that go on. Either if you're playing or watching, can't wait to have you there to see it. We'll be doing LobbyCon, so even if I can't play in the tournament, I'm still pumped to be there to play and to commentate. Again, this is April 18th and 19th, Cleveland, Ohio. The next event I want to talk about is the Quest for a Cause. This is going to be put on by Tap for Hope in association with the Children's Cancer Association. So this is going to be a 10K event in Portland, Oregon on May 16th and May 17th. Again, this is such an awesome event because it's for a good cause and it's just put on by an amazing community. I've been chatting more and more with the Portland community, and being from Oregon, I love what they're doing. I love the scene they're creating, and I can't wait to get down there to play. I'll be in an event on Friday called the Creator Clash, so I'll be playing with some other content creators and people in the space, and then I'll be playing in the tournament the next day. So May 16th and 17th, I'll see you in Portland. The final tournament I want to talk to you guys about is Just Jam D-Grid. This is going to be Phoenix, Arizona on May 30th. It'll be a 20K if it reaches diamond status at 250 players. And it's at Gamers Guild. If you were at Cradle to the Guild last year, it's that shop, and I just think it's a banger shop. Like, they have food, drinks, they have amazing facilities. It's a huge shop, there's tons of space. One of my favorite shops to play at of all time for a tournament. So if you're free May 30th, make sure to get your tickets now while the flights are still cheap. Get your Airbnbs booked. I know that's what we have done, and thank God, because they've already gotten so much more expensive. So if you're free, go to Just Jam. I'll be there playing, and I can't wait to see you there. Before we jump in, make sure to stay till the end of the video to see how you can win a free deck from Mana Vault Proxies. All right, let's jump on in. Welcome back to Bite Size Magic. I have 2 very special guests. Both have been on the channel. Kevin's been on the channel a little bit more. And Kyzr, I'm super excited to have you back on. And really what we're going to dive into today, from my understanding, is game theory and cEDH and how the two really intermingle and come together and can make people better players when you can understand how they relate to each other. So why don't you guys just let people know who you are, and we can kind of dive in from there.
Sure. Kevin, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. Hi guys, I'm Kevin Simmons, or VarrakS, whatever. I've been playing cEDH for like almost a decade now, so I guess I'm an old head, and I love really cool stuff. I like pioneering like existing like potential top decks into something cooler than what they are. In my own opinion, of course, right? So yeah. I guess I've played successfully Kinnan, Thrasfile, Blue Farm, but I'll never admit it in court. Rouse, Sissy. I mean, the list just goes on. I've played like 100+ decks in tournaments. So
nice. Awesome. Hey, everybody. My name's Dave. I go by Kyzr. I've been playing Magic for 33 years now, and cEDH for about 10. So yeah, 2016. Yeah. So cEDH for about 10. So I've been doing this for a long time. You can actually see all the gray hair on my head. I definitely have dad energy in the cEDH community. I don't get to play in a lot of events, but there's a lot of really great people that I like to spend my time with when I do have time to jam some games. So I'm excited to be talking about this. This topic is actually near and dear to my heart, because when I think about what it takes to be good at cEDH specifically, not just Magic, but cEDH, those skills are very transferable to the business world. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, is how cEDH, like what comprises cEDH skill, like newsflash, game theory is a big part of it, how that translates into the business world and back for people that want to get better at cEDH, or for people that want to take their cEDH skills and apply it to something outside of the game.
Heck yeah. Well, that's a pretty good list of credentials. And Dave, in terms of your work and what you do outside of cEDH, how does that relate to game theory and help express it inside the game?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been playing games for as long as I can remember. I mean, my parents are, former Soviet immigrants, and I played chess every night with my father, right?
Me too.
And he never
Yeah.
let me win. So that's
Yep.
kind of that's what started it all. And I've been playing Magic. I remember I think it was like I was taking like gymnastics. I was 10 years old, and some kid showed up with Magic cards. They were from Unlimited, and I saw a crawl worm, and I was hooked. Like that was it. Like
Heck yeah.
that started it all right then and there. What I do outside of cEDH, I'm a senior executive at a very large consultancy, and two topic areas that are near and dear to my heart. I took them in business school. I've actually taught them at the graduate level, and I've taught them in the corporate world, are negotiation and game theory. And
Sweet.
I'm actually going to talk about both because I believe that the three most important skills in cEDH are math, talk about math, game theory, which I think is twice as important, and negotiation. You hear the term politics, table talk, yapping. I actually think politics is a misnomer. What we're really doing is negotiating. And so I'll talk a lot more about that. And all of those, you kind of wrap it all up. You get better by practicing, which is one of the reasons why I'll never be one of the greats. But you combine all three of those skills and then you practice. That's how you get good at cEDH. It's, in my eyes, it's very simple.
Yeah. And you have a very cool equation that I just want to share.
Yeah.
I'll share my screen right now. So like you said, we have parentheses math plus 2, parentheses game theory, and parentheses plus negotiation, parentheses times practice. So talk to me about how this equation here kind of relates to what you just said and why it's formulated in the specific way it is.
Yeah, this is my point of view. There is nothing scientific about this. But like I said, I think the three most important skills for cEDH are math, game theory, and negotiation. So math is really optimizing your actions, right? And we'll talk about the math piece, but the math consists of arithmetic, right? So like think about like breach lines. Kevin, the last time we were on this podcast, we talked about breach lines specifically. Sorry.
Good.
And then the more complicated aspect is probability, right? So calculating your probability to win, or necro lines, for instance. Those are all probability. I actually have some specific numbers. I actually reached out to Joe Stacco, who many of you in the community may know. Stacco is a mathematician. Not only is he a mathematician, but he works in the casino industry designing slot machines. So he actually understands game theory probability. So I actually asked him to crunch some numbers on necro lines for me. So if we want to talk about necro lines, we can use the numbers, and then Kevin here, who I've said multiple times is one of the best necro pilots I've ever met. So that's the math piece. The game theory piece is being able to predict your opponent's actions. And I actually want to introduce some classical game theory fundamentals and how they apply to cEDH. And then lastly, negotiation, which I actually think is my superpower in this game. And so we can talk a little bit, about that at the end.
Heck yeah. Kevin, any comments?
Oh, no, I love it. This is like, I'm so stoked to be a part of this conversation. I'm just excited to be able to talk on this topic. I just thought it was really funny as Kyzr was giving me the love giving me my flowers on the Necropotence gaming while talking about, like the functions of how everything, relates to the actual game and theory. And I'm like, I make all decisions vibe based. So
like this breach line probably works.
There's an accidental bridge. So there's hope for people that aren't super geniuses that understood everything Dave just said.
Well, here's the thing. And by the way, like I came to realize this. So I used to play Tameshi for a long time. And for those of you that are familiar with the deck, the lines are very complicated, and there's a lot of math involved in being able to keep track of how many lands you need to have in play and recurring them to very mana intensive. It would take a whole podcast to go through Tameshi, win lines. And what I found in the community is there were some people that actually did the math every time, myself being one of them, and others who just found sort of like, rubrics, like cheat sheets where they're like, okay, I know I need this many lands in play and this much mana, and then they didn't have to keep doing the math. And so what I found is there are people that aren't so good at math that will just kind of memorize stuff and use that as a substitute, which is fine, except when you're in a scenario that is a little unfamiliar, and then all of a sudden your rubric kind of goes out the window. And so then the math becomes very important.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Do we want to discuss how the skills in the business apply to cEDH and vice versa? Like how those two kind of correlate together and relate to each other? Or do we want to jump into the 3 levels?
No, I mean, simply put, all 3 of these skills are very relevant in the business world. I use them every single day. I use them engaging with clients. I use them with my teams. I use them to solve real world problems. And they're the same skills that come to play at the cEDH table, which is like, I think one of the reasons why I still do it, and why, I honestly, I feel like cEDH keeps me sharp. I use a lot of similar gamesmanship in work, and I think the skills are really transferable. And so I guess for the people out there that are trying to figure out, like, a lot of cEDH players are younger, maybe in their early 20s, and trying to figure out, like what the next step is in their career. Just understand that the skills that you're honing playing cEDH are very relevant in the business world, and just think about how you can apply them.
That's sweet.
Yeah, I think that's especially true because of how much individual thinking is required to actually process certain like positions that players will find themselves in. The same can be very, very much so true in corporate settings, or even, whatever setting professionally you find yourself in. There's always some way that this could be applied. So I totally agree. I jokingly have even told my wife that cEDH skills are the only reason that I've stayed married. So
that's funny. Yeah. Heck yeah. Okay, let's jump into the 3 levels. So we talk about number 1 level being to maximize your actions. That really comes from math, right? Like that's right. Directly correlated to math. Can I maximize my opportunity with the cards I have in my hand? Do I know what the optimal tutor target is? Do I understand how to mulligan correctly? And can I execute my combos? Number 2 is predicting opponent's actions, right? So this is game theory. I understand that what your deck does. I understand the philosophy of your deck, right? Like its goal, its mission, why it's built, and why it's constructed that way. I can understand you as a person and what you might end up doing. This probably relates somewhat to psychology, but we'll stick to game theory for now.
Yeah.
And then finally, I'm influencing my opponent's actions through negotiation. So let's dive into that. Sweet. Let's start with math then. It's my
okay. So let's start
with worst one.
Yeah.
Me and Kevin.
So all right. So there's the arithmetic side, which is like breach lines, being able to count your mana, like blah blah blah, right? Like we don't need to go super deep on that. But where it becomes really interesting is when you're calculating probability, right? And so for instance, I have a couple of friends that play Blue Farm and they don't run Necro. Famously, Matt Hayes is a guy that doesn't run Necro in his Blue Farm list. And one of the Matt Hayes kind of followers, actually really good player named Max, says, well, I'm not good at Necro lines.
Yeah.
And I think what he's really saying is, I'm not good at calculating probability. And I actually think that's a really, really important skill is understanding like what your jumping off point is. So Kevin, I want to go to you, right? Like I've said this multiple times. I think you're one of the best Necro pilots out there. Whether you're actually doing the math or this is just from years of training and experience, how do you think about Necro, when to push, like what calculations are going on in your head?
Yeah, so like jokes aside, I think math does play a huge part of it. I've always kind of looked at it that I just am too lazy to do math in a hobby. So like even still, though subconsciously some of it's going on. But like if I just don't even think about math, it's almost like I'm that like jujutsu sorcerer that just doesn't have any sorcery, right? With a heavenly pact of experience. So like that experience naturally will teach you some of these like mathematics that we're kind of talking about. But really with the necropotencies specifically, I think where most players can miscalculate. Well, number one, you have to just really understand how the lines work. That's something that I think really simply is well learned through a coaching thing. Or actually, I think Critical EDH guys had a really good video about just like the standard necro math a little bit on how it should play out in a perfect world. But then where most players slip up and might suggest like, oh, I don't have high conversions upon winning to, a resolved necropotence, is board state evaluation. And then, so I think that starts by reading players. So that ties in directly with the point number 2, predicting opponents' actions. So a lot of this can be influenced by trying to doing soft negotiations or otherwise throwing around ideas that gives you a little bit of a scent on what you're likely going to be up against. And then from there, kind of determining how many exact pieces do I actually need to beat? And do I have the critical mass of resources once I place X amount of cards in my hand or not? So a great example, and like the green deck, so I'm just going to assume everyone's playing Thrasios Vial or a deck like that that's very, very good at the
That's
necros.
why you're here, Kevin.
Okay, great, wonderful. So 3 mana is the critical mass typically, where you're going to be able to beat 1 to 2 pieces of interaction with 3 mana available, just due to the double spirit guides. Also part of the reason why the list is on double veil as well, because it helps level out that interaction hit without using some of the valuable mana sources, being your blue and your red and your black. Grixis turns out is really good. So that said, if it's a high resource environment, this math is going to be completely upside down. Let's say you're up against Freedom Waffle and one of his acolytes on NBC Kinnan, and they both have 3 Rhystic studies, and no one's pushed. You're likely going to need to beat 7 pieces of interaction. So in that state, you're going to need way more mana, and more likely you're going to actually have to make your necropotence a value necro, which is the most cringe thing ever, I know, but it's just not, there's not enough life points to pay into necro at that point.
You just raised a really good point, which is the fact that calculating how many pieces you need to beat after you necro factors into how much mana you need open, right? So for me, I like to think of this in layers, right? The first layer is just, if I full send a necro, if I just necro for like 33 to 36, right? What are my chances that I'm going to hit Born, Valley Floodcaller, Final Fortune? That's pretty simple probability, but that's the ceiling. And like the answer is it's around 75%, give or take, depending on how many cards and so on and so forth, right? So right then and there, and then you can factor in, well, like I could top deck Tutor and Manamorphose, or I could, Demonic Consultation or what have you. But generally speaking, now I know that my ceiling for converting a necro when I full send is 75%, right? Then you start going down from there and saying, okay, well then let's assume that I pilot my necro line perfectly, which, Kevin, I would say you're one of the best in the world at. So let's subtract, up to 5%, right? So now my ceiling is around 70%, provided I've got 2 to 3 mana open. That assumes no interaction. Okay, well now, let's say I'm sending it into a Rhystic, or let's say that, I think somebody's got a piece, maybe they had a Fluster or an MBT and they couldn't stop the necro, but they can stop the push. Your probability starts going down, right? And so that's the stuff that needs to go through your head when you're deciding, okay, do I full send? At what point is it worth going? Like, I want to compare that against what my win probability was when I sat down to begin with, right? And so, you play green. It's not just Grixis. You're not playing Rogsai. Green, my translation is that 5% that I just took off the top, right, from 75 down to 70 to help convert once you hit one of those 3 pieces. I think green essentially shrinks that 5% down to 1.5%. To me, that's the advantage of playing green.
The green advantage is huge. Overall, I think everything we just said can be simply summarized into there's a difference between conversion and actually winning games. So tons of necropotences can convert, but not all of them are going to go to heaven. All right. Yeah. So but realistically, the focus should always be on winning the game. And then your decisions that you're making and the ways that you negotiate and try to create these favorable outcomes of getting closer and closer and ultimately closing the door on victory is really going to be the focus, where most people get the tunnel vision of how do I find Born? How do I find Final Fortune? And then once those resolve, I win, right? Like, well, probably. So.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, like, you kind of joked about like not doing the math and this stuff coming instinctively. Like how often are you actually like running numbers and calculating odds versus just, I've done this so many times, instinctively I know this is going to work. This is probably going to work or probably won't work.
Yeah. So what you said earlier about heuristics or essentially like placeholders for math is something I really do believe in, both for myself and also when I'm doing like teaching people and doing clients. So generally it's variable, but I like to think of Necro as generally like a turn 2 or 2-turn card, where it's the first time I use my Necro, I am refilling and sculpting. So the goal of that first Necro is not to win. Like an often a mistake people make, and sometimes the reason I think people don't like Necro is they'll play Necro, pay 30 life, find, whatever, and then they go to the next turn to try and win, and it's like, well, you've used all the resources that you had available to you with the Necro. So if you can't win right there, you lose. And then they're like, well, this card sucks. I don't understand why it's good. Instead, I like to say, on that first rip, we're looking for the setup. We're trying to understand how much mana we're going to need. We're going to understand if we have a tutor for Born, Flood Caller, or Final Fortune, or if it's presented in that first one, or, and this is an important thing, is can I just win at sorcery speed? Because if I get initial rip on that Necro and I see 14 cards and I sculpt to 7, I might be able to present a sorcery speed win. It gets stopped, and then I go again on the next turn. And so you can kind of use it in a variable way. But how I generally go about using a card like Necropotence is, like I said, first one, I'm refilling to about 15 cards in hand and sculpting to 7. So I have a good chance of seeing cards that give me both mana interaction and what I need. And then the second rip, I'm usually sculpting, or I'm paying around a number of life that gets me to like 4 to 5 is a good range, because I want to take into account spells like Mental Misstep that I might need to use, Force of Will, someone casting a Bowmaster, that coming down, Vamp Tutor, needing to pay life and then draw that card. And so I do that, and then I just go from there. But math-wise, I'm really not incorporating too much calculation into how I use Necropotence.
So I do the same. The one difference when I'm evaluating whether I can afford to sculpt and push on the following turn or not is what are my opponents going to do on their turns after I've sculpted? Because if a Ristic and 2 fish come down, well, did I just piss away whatever odds I just gave myself? Right? Yeah. Because I also know that if I only have 1 mana open and I've got 2 Spirit Guides in my hand, I've got a 30-some-odd% chance to hit one of those Spirit Guides, right? And so those aren't good odds, right? That then my ceiling is at whatever, mid-30s. You factor everything else in, and my chance to win is probably somewhere in the 20s. Well, if I sit down at a table, I'm expecting, my win percentage as a player is around 40%, right? So when I sit down, nothing, no revealed information. I've just sat down. Let's say I'm not in 4th seat. I'm giving myself a 40% chance to win, maybe high 30s. So I'm never going to put myself in a scenario unless a whole lot's changed where I'm now giving myself 25% chance to win.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's actually really kind of a cool way to think about it, which I haven't thought about before, right? Which is, what's my average win percentage, and does the win attempt I have now match or outweigh my average, right? Do I maybe have a 70% chance? That's much better than 40%. That's probably good enough odds for me to take those chances right there.
So this is I wanted to pivot this because this starts getting into game theory, but what I think people don't do enough is calculate their win percentage and then recalculate as the game goes on, right? So if I sit down, I'm giving myself a 40% chance to win, which means if I'm in 4th seat, maybe it's high 20s, right? So at any given time, let's say that turn rotation and everyone's still at approximate parity. That's still my win percentage. I'm not going to put a win on the stack that I think has an 80% chance of getting countered, right? But if it's 50-50, I'm going to send it because that 50% is better. I actually saw that. It was the Dallas event, Higher and Pigeon were streaming, and there was a window where one of the players, I forgot who it was, had a chance to jam an ad nause. Obviously, us watching, we knew the window was open, but he took the safe play and went for a heuristic study. And at that moment, I was wondering, what were the chances right then and there that somebody had a piece? It was probably less than 50%, and he was in fourth seed, right? So he probably should have just gone and jammed that ad nos right then and there.
This is a fascinating line of thought because I think it's actually what most players, like post-event, obsess over is, oh, I didn't see the line, or what else could I have done? But very few of us, myself admittedly as well, don't really commonly think about it in game. I mean, I'm a firm believer. I know I've said before, maybe even here, but people in general are big fans of patterns. And part of the gaming pattern that we develop is, this is how a game should play out. This is what I'm supposed to do. So I can actually even tie it right back in what we're talking about now to what we were talking about earlier about necropotence. My highest loss rate upon resolving a necropotence is not paying enough life, because I failed to determine my opponent's ability to also present win. And I tunneled on how attractive I thought, oh, I'm able to play my primary game plan of necro, pay 10 life, pass, and then really push hard the following turn cycle, when another player is going to be able to push a double protected win right after me. Yeah. So, and then I come up short on interaction that I would have needed to find in that setting because I wasn't evaluating individual game actions as they were kind of playing out. So I love that. I think that's really exciting actually to try to implement.
It's actually a natural segue into game theory, and I'll explain why. But when I talk about math, right, talked about arithmetic, we're not going to waste time on it. Obviously, like if you're playing cEDH, you should be pretty damn good at arithmetic, right? We talked about probability. But there's also this concept of Bayesian probability, which is a game theory term. So I'm going to get into game theory. This is going to get a little academic, but just bear with me, right?
Real quick, I want to shout out our sponsor for today's video, Dootloot. Dootloot is a cEDH vendor specializing in non-English foils, signed and altered cards, reserved list, judge promos, and secret layers to set your deck apart from the rest. He carries cards for every budget, even starting as low as $5. The Dootloot Discord is a simple, no-nonsense feed of cards updated weekly. He even does monthly giveaways and free tokens with every order. In addition, we do giveaways from Doot on our channel once a month, so make sure to catch those videos where we're giving away his exciting foreign cards. Keep up to date with new arrivals on Instagram at DootlootIG and join over 5,000 other members at discord.gg/Dootloot. This is the best place for cEDH playing, and it's the place where you want to buy your foreign cards. Without further ado, keep enjoying the video.
There's different types of games. What makes cEDH so interesting is it's a Bayesian game, which means that there's multiple parties and we have imperfect information, right? And as we gain new information, we have to adjust. And so what we're actually doing, what's actually happening in our brains, which is so interesting, is we have a subjective belief, which is based on all the information I have, which, by the way, this is why information is so important and why the best cEDH players do so much with information, right? That others don't, is because of this exact thing, is you have a subjective belief based on the information you've gathered. You get a new piece of information, and then you have an updated belief, right? It's that pattern. Subjective belief, new piece of information, updated belief. But then what we're doing is there's multiple nodes, right? Because we're thinking about, well, what if I do this? What if I do this? What if I do this? There's multiple actions that anyone can take at any point in time. And so what we're actually doing in our brains is we're calculating this and recalculating for each possible node. And the best players are the ones that can do this, that can extrapolate this for multiple nodes. And so that's what makes this such an interesting game, and why information is so important, and why, Kevin, like, I see you do this all the time, and we can debate about like when is the right time to do it and when isn't. When you go like, hey, how do people feel about a necro, right? Like, you're fishing for information, right? You have a belief. Now you're gathering information to then refine that belief so that you can take a more optimal course of action, right? When you're like trying to figure out, is someone going to counter this necro? If there's, like, you're trying to gather information, and then it's really interesting, the ways in which people go about revealing information, whether intentionally or not. But that's what's actually happening. And like at some point, Zach, we should talk about that. But then I want to talk about two really classical game theory concepts where if you take like an intro to game theory course, you'll learn about them, but they actually both have applications in cEDH.
Yeah, I love it. I think something, and I think there's a psychology episode that has to come at some point here, but part of the reason I think people like me might be drawn to cEDH is like, I definitely see factors or symptoms of like ADHD within myself. And with ADHD, there's parts of it that are very hindering to your capabilities to go about normal life, right? Like I am constantly aware of my entire environment. I'm taking in a lot of inputs and I'm digesting and then relating them. And cEDH is perfect for people with ADHD because you have to be taking in so much information at once, calculating a lot of different things at the same time. I gotta know my situation in the micro. I need to understand the macro board state. I need to understand my tone and how I'm coming across to other people. I need to know when the correct time is to fish, when the correct time is not, and just to stay quiet. Like the idea of Bayesian is exactly why I think the game is so interesting and so much fun for people who might have similar tendencies or, I don't want to say complexions, but like, people who think about life in similar ways that I do, is because you want to be digesting all this information at once and you want to be evaluating so many different things and like kind of dipping your hands into a lot of different pots. And I know, Kevin, we've talked about this a little bit too.
Well, like, look, if you think about it, what makes this interesting is, like, let's take chess, for instance. Obviously, chess is, it's been around for a long time. It's considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest game ever invented. But in any game of chess, everybody has all of the information, right? And it's just what you do with it. And the grandmasters are better with that information than others. And I'm not a chess expert. I played a lot of chess as a kid, not a chess expert. So like for you chess players out there, I'm sorry if I just butchered the shit out of, chess. But with cEDH, we do not have perfect information. And so we are all trying to gather, like, not only is there a differential between the greats and the not so greats and what they do with that information, but not everyone has the same information. And so so to your point, Zach, like your ability to evaluate all these different things and compile that information and then update your belief, that in and of itself is a skill. Some people are better at it than others.
And actually, you could even someone like myself who's just recently started playing chess, like within the last year, and I am such a part-timer, like rating is embarrassing, but like I can notice things happening where it's similar, even though chess is more of like that closer to the sub-zero game in game theory terms, like sometimes there's a similarity still within the game that I've noticed where like an invisible bishop that I blundered a piece to or something is just like a force of will that I was not putting an opponent on. The difference is we have the control, and that's where I think, well, not total control, but we have influence over the outcome of that piece. You can't particularly politic your chess opponent to not take your queen. So I've tried.
Me too.
It's interesting. I've watched the tape on this, and I've seen a lot of top cEDH players get blown out by a piece of onboard interaction, right? That is revealed information, right? And so it just goes to show that like you got to do the best to gather the hidden information that you can, but you also have to be really good at handling revealed information. And so it's a lot to process is the point. Zach, let me give two examples, because you actually mentioned this. You might have mentioned this on one of your podcasts, and I think I DM'd you about this. So two concepts that people may have heard of. One is the prisoner's dilemma, right? Which is a really, really classic game. It's like if you learn about game theory, you're going to learn about prisoner's dilemma. And the premise is that, two people have been arrested for a crime and they're taken into separate, interrogations. And basically the cops say, all right, if you stay silent, right? But, I've got your partner in another room over there and they rat you out, they're going to go free and you're going to get 3 years. Okay. If you both stay silent, you're each going to do 1 year. And if you both rat each other out, you're going to do 2 years. Now the correct answer for both people is that they stay quiet and they do 2 years, right? But inevitably, what happens?
2 years total, right?
2 years. Yeah,
2 years total. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. 2 years in prison, right? Now, inevitably, what happens is they both rat the other one out. That's basically what you find, is because they don't trust that the other person's gonna stay quiet, and so they both end up getting 3 years. They get the maximum sentence. And so the whole premise is that even though there's an equilibrium, or there's a scenario where both people can get a reduced sentence, they end up not getting a reduced sentence, right? And it's because of that lack of communication, lack of trust, et cetera. Like, it's just one of those things that plays out. And we see this all the time at the cEDH table, where someone with a tithe is pushing, and, Ristic player number one goes, well, I got to draw. And then the other player's like, well, if you're drawing, I'm drawing. And then, right, like, we see this over and over again. That is the prisoner's dilemma playing out. And the way that you combat that is through communication and through negotiation. So when we get to negotiation, we'll talk about that. But that is classic, common human behavior. And so, like, if you've ever sat at a table where someone was just, drawing into the Ristic and feeding a tithe, like, that's...
Sorry.
Don't be surprised, right? Like, and so the key is to be able to identify when that scenario is playing out, right? When you're in a classic prisoner's dilemma scenario, and get ahead of it by communicating with the other players.
Yeah. I think one of the most important parts of this is trust. And this is also one of the best skills of top players, is they gain trust very, very successfully across a wide spectrum of other players. So not only are they able to, identify information, do the math, right? But they get other people to trust what they're saying. And they get them to make, like you're saying, the optimal decision for both of them. Instead of us both getting kind of screwed, we're both going to figure out the best thing because you trust me, and what I'm saying being the best scenario to play out is what happens if we both stick to our guns. So yeah, trust is paramount in game theory. And
that's what a skilled negotiator is able to do, is they're able to build trust, and they're able to do it very, very quickly. I'll get to this in negotiation, but and he's been on podcasts before, but Nystrom, in my opinion, is one of the best in the world, at least in the cEDH world, at this. And it's actually specifically because of how he communicates that he's able to build trust.
Excited for that. Why don't we talk about mutually assured destruction and how that's different than the prisoner's dilemma?
Very different. And so I actually looked for this exact scenario. So the premise of mutually assured destruction is that there are two superpowers that are like guns locked and loaded, pointed at each other, and neither is willing to fire, because if they do, they're both dead, right? Classic example of mutually assured destruction is the Cold War, right? We built up our nuclear arsenal, Soviet Union built up their nuclear arsenal, and nothing happened, right? Because that was a classic mutually assured destruction scenario. Neither was willing to fire or do anything, because then everyone's dead, right? And so think about how many times you're at a table where there are essentially two superpowers, and as a result, the game kind of hits a stall. It's really important to be able to identify that scenario, because if you're not one of those players, it gives you a window to get caught up. And so if I'm locked in a mid-range game and I'm way behind, I actually am looking to create a mutually assured destruction scenario, because that's going to give me time to catch up. I've heard the joke, the best way to deal with a bad guy with a heuristic study is a good guy with a heuristic study. That's like, there's your classic scenario right there. Yeah.
So it's funny because actually, Zach, I think that a lot of this was showcased from the gameplay of your games of yours I was watching at the Invitational this past year specifically, where you recognized a lot of these board states where you were, and this is like the emphasis of a high level mid-range player. Not that you were a mid-range player by label or definition, but an attribute of them is that. Okay, well, sure.
You're calling a dirty mid-range player all day.
Sure. My point is that inching forward and like kind of gaining that ground, like Kyzr's talking about, is something I think that you really excel at. I have an overall principle I firmly believe in, where it's like you want to fly as close to the sun while being somewhere in between radar and actual thermal explosion.
Yeah.
And that's how I apply that theory a lot in game and in brewing, and it's extremely helpful because like you're a 4-player format, so and these situations happen quite often, like especially being that we're a high variance format, and it's so common that you're the one guy that or girl that just has to mold a 3 and everyone else keeps first 7s and they're like 6 mana heuristic study and you're just sitting there like oh my
You missed the boat somewhere in that scenario. And by the way, like we've thrown around some of these names. There are players that seek out that game state and they design their decks to perform in that game state, right? We've talked about, like, famously, Evan, Freedom Waffle, his deck is designed for this, and he uses a variety of the skills that we're talking about today to get to that position where his deck is designed to be better than everybody else's, specifically because he can make more mana than everybody else, right? And by the way, like, case in point, I'm noticing other people building their decks to compete with that. We just talked about Rog Ishai.
Yeah.
But like, I'm going to call out a couple of other people, like Jace, who notably loves Stormkiln Artist for this exact reason. Jace is another player like Freedom Waffle who is very, very good in those types of scenarios, and he designs his decks to perform in those scenarios for that reason. It's actually a weakness in my game. I hate those game states. I try to avoid them, and I do not build my decks to perform well in those game states. But I at least savvy enough to understand when I'm headed in that direction.
Yeah, and dealing with it when you get there, right?
Exactly.
Like understanding that we're going there. And there's also ways to avoid this, right? One thing that the Mardu pilots in my local area like to do, Jacob and Brian, is they do something called creating chaos. And it's a situation... Yeah,
I do this
We're
quite often
segueing
myself.
right and left. Yeah, and we'll get into more depth with your actual knowledge. But what they do is, in situations where it's like both players have heuristic studies, they do something that's just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, they're just like, here's this OBM, or I'm going to kill your heuristic study. I'm removing your heuristic study, right? And you're like, why are you doing that? And they're like, because I need to create some sort of displacement of the current status quo. I have to.
Well, but that's the correct strat. So that's exactly right. So I was just about to say this, which is when you've reached, and so like you'll hear the term, like if you take a class on game theory, you'll hear the term Nash equilibrium. Like essentially what we're talking about is, in cEDH terms, reaching a point of Nash equilibrium. It explains why stores, like all the shopping stores, are on one street in a town rather than spread out, that sort of thing. In any case, not to get academic, but the way you deal with that, if everyone's got guns pointed at their heads and everyone's afraid to fire, is you trigger it. Let's say I want to force somebody to push when they don't want to push, I'll remove their cabbage merchant, and they've got like 26 foods.
Yeah.
I'm forcing them. They have to do something. They can't just let their cabbage merchant die, right? And so that could be the spark that starts nuclear war. And we all know in that scenario, if I'm using less interaction than everybody else, I'm going to win, right? Like, it's really just that simple. And so, like, to your point, when Mardu players are doing that, that's a brilliant play, right? Because whether they realize it or not, they've identified the fact that they're in a mutually assured destruction scenario, and they are causing chaos, which is oftentimes the right strategy, provided that they're not the ones getting fired at.
Yeah. In a more simplistic way of like viewing that, I think it's very safe to say that good players recognize when their window of opportunity exists, and great players create windows.
That's a really good way of putting it.
So like just last night, actually, I go to Untap. I think I may have made a deal to like just pay for fish, not develop board any further. So part of what I did in main phase, I just besaged Aristic. And I asked the player that I made the deal with, I'm like, hey, are you okay with this if I besage you this other guy's Aristic? Yeah. But resources were so high in the game that if I wanted it to reach a conclusion of finality, or finality meaning non-draw, there's a winner. Like I need there to be an imbalance created somewhere, and like I put it on that Sorry, it was Seth. It was Kinnan. Sorry, man. But like, we couldn't afford allowing him to like continue playing the primary game plan. We actually needed to rebalance because there was a card distribution that was super imbalanced that was going to be able to make sense for someone else to start pushing. But
You broke parity that existed at the table, right?
Yeah.
Nash equilibrium, parity, similar ways of talking about the same thing, right?
Shattered the Nash equilibrium. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
That's why I use that example, right? The point is like there's a lot of, we can go deeper, right? We could do 10 podcasts on this topic, right? But the point is like these are the things that are taught in like intro to game theory for a reason.
Yeah.
They show up everywhere. And if you just pick up a book, right? And like if you're interested in this topic, identify these things, and then you can develop some skills to improve, to combat these scenarios, to know what to do, etc.
Heck yeah.
Also, I have to say it while we're talking about it. Sorry, and then Zach, it's just so funny.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
So while we're on the topic of Nash equilibrium, you have to be aware that sometimes you are an unfortunate statistic, and I call that the Nashville equilibrium, where things do not play out as they should. So like you might besage you this Ristic, the next guy goes, okay, underworld breach, and nobody has anything. You're like, so, anyway,
then we're in Nashville.
then you're just in Nashville. Yep. And you enjoy the night. I don't know.
Yeah. So the first thing is, Dave, do you have any recommendations for people who are interested in game theory as a good place to start? Or would they be good to just Google?
Let's do this. I will suggest some books. I actually have not read a lot of books on this topic. I took a lot of courses. I do, on the topic of negotiation, I do have some books that I can recommend. I would Google it, but there's a lot of like online courses that you can take that I think are really interesting, and I would recommend it. I think it's one of the more interesting topics of sort of like graduate studies, to be honest. So.
Awesome. Yeah. The second thing I was going to relate to what you said, Kevin, which is in the invitational game, in like the titular, the finals game, I did mold a 3. And I was like, oh, I'm fucked. Like, I've lost. Like, I assumed like, there's no way I get out of this. But the situation that was created was Andy Beach had a great board state. Timna, Bowmasters, like he was just cruising to victory very clearly. And all I had in my hand was a Fairy Mastermind that I could flash in. And he goes to swing, and I talk to the other players. I'm like, hey, I think you guys have to block with your Esper Sentinels. Like, you have to block the Timna and the Bowmaster token because A, they're going to die from this Bowmaster at some point. B, if you do draw cards, he's just going to accumulate more with this Bowmaster. And then C, we're going to deny him the card draw and the treasures from the Facebreaker. And I was like, if you guys block, I'll flash in this fairy, and I can block. I could block. I don't think I was like, I will block. And what happened, and everyone just freaks out on the stream, and they're like, how did this happen? Is Andy is like, okay, don't block with your fairy, and I'll kill my own Bowmaster off of the, I think some sort of trigger. Oh, it was because he would have drawn from the Timna, that would have triggered the fairy, and then his Bowmaster would have triggered, and he's like, I'll kill my own Bowmasters. And so what ended up happening was chaos was created. I forced the state of the game that it was currently going into one of like something that was not expected. And what ended up happening was both Esper Sentinels die, the Bowmaster dies, and I get a Fairy Mastermind. And everyone's like, how did this happen? Like, how could this have been created? You know, this is ridiculous. And I was like, well, it's just, you know, I offered some sort of deal and made some sort of suggestion as to what would happen if the current status quo was kept. And I offered a solution to try and change that status quo. And it worked out great. And I was like, this is perfect. This is the optimal scenario for me.
You actually segued perfectly into negotiation.
Perfect. Let's jump in.
My big bugaboo is the term politics. I think it's the wrong term. And if I achieve nothing other than convincing people to stop using the term politics and start using the term negotiation when referring to table talk, I will consider that my like lasting impact on this format,
Nice.
because that's really what it is. And from the moment that you sit down at the table, right, like this, everything you say, you are negotiating, right? Like I'll give you like a really simple example, right? Like let's say I keep first 7, and Kevin in third seed is like, oh, Kyzr kept first 7, watch out. And I make some statement like, I wouldn't be too worried, it's a mid first 7 or whatever. Like how many times have you heard that, right?
Say it all the time.
That is like, we are negotiating, right? And we've now just made something of an implicit deal, right? Like the deal, not an official handshake deal where like you're going to go on Twitter and call me a liar, right? But like the deal that we just made is I said, I'm not going to push early and you're not going to evaluate me as a high threat, right? Like that's what just happened in that scenario, right? So even that little bit of table talk was negotiation. And so point being, everything that anyone says, they're negotiating. And that's not like right or wrong, and they're not a bad person for doing that, but that's a core part of the game. That's what makes the game so interesting. You know, like I use Freedom Waffle in a lot of these examples for a reason. I think he's very good at this. And I always hear the joke like, oh, you know, like even my friends will be like, I don't know why anyone listens to that guy. Like no one should trust anything he says, right? Well, that's actually not true. Right? Like it's that he's mastered a lot of these things, whether he realizes it or not. And he's put you in a position where you have to listen to what he says because he's appealing to your interests. He's just good at it. So in any case, what I wanted to offer up is a framework that you can use to think about how to negotiate in cEDH. And by the way, this framework is what they teach at Harvard. They teach it in Harvard Business School. They teach it in Harvard Law School. It's based on a book. That book is called Getting to Yes. If there's one book I can recommend, it's that. It's a very, very easy to read book. It's, in my opinion, like the Bible of modern negotiating. It's all about creating value. And by the way, it's very applicable to cEDH. So I've taught this course. I've taught it at the graduate level. I've taught it at the corporate level. And so fundamentally, what they teach you is there's 7 principles that you need to think about when you're preparing for a negotiation and when you're going through a negotiation. So I wanted to suggest is, why don't we go through all 7, and then like I'm sure we'll have some examples, stories, etc. Does that work?
Perfect. Yeah. One quick relational thing I wanted to say was the chess example we brought up earlier, the fact that you can see everything on a chessboard. The reason that grandmasters, you know, these people that are so good at chess is because they see what's coming from a mile away, right? Like you, as an amateur, if you make a move and I'm like, oh, that changed everything. It's like, no, that was always a probability of a move that could have happened. I just am not
Nashville equilibrium.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Evan, other good political or other good negotiators, is what I'll reframe to saying, is that they see everything. Everything is on board in some way or another, and they're just able to see further ahead. And the reason we listen to them is because, like you said, what they're saying is true. They just have better insight into the future than we do. So I was just going to pose that as a quick relationship real quick, and then
it is. And so essentially where that fits in, I'm going to get to it is, I'm going to get to it. So let's start. The first one is relationship. This is like the starting point. And by the way, this is very relevant because there's been a lot of discussion about lying and is lying okay? And there's a lot of debate about what is lying and what isn't lying. And so, look, like we can save that debate for, you know, Twitter and whether or not someone is going to be ostracized for lying or not. But at the table, what I would suggest you think about instead is your relationship with the players. What was your relationship going in? What is your relationship during that game? And what relationship do you want to have with those players after? Because your relationship is what's going to give you capital to be able to have any sort of conversation. We talked about trust. That's where trust comes in. And so, you know, we can play that game where, you know, I say I'm not going to win, but then I final fortune and I didn't say I was going to win on an extra turn. And we can have that debate, right, about whether or not that's okay. And that may be okay from the standpoint of I'm not going to get roasted on social media about it, but I can guarantee you that that's going to impact your relationship with that player, and they're going to be less likely to trust you next time. And you just got to evaluate. Like my point is, I'm not saying don't do it. What I'm saying is be mindful of the relationship that you have, the relationship that you want to have when you're negotiating with somebody. It's just that simple.
Or the relationship you're stuck with.
or the result, the reputation that you have afterward.
Dave, do you want to cover all 7, or do you want to go one by one and kind of discuss some ideas around them?
Yeah, it's up to you, Zach. I would say let's discuss each one, and then
I think so. Yeah. So initially, and again, a lot of these things are things a lot of players are already doing. They just don't know they're doing them, right? And For me,
Right.
especially, right? Relationship is probably the number one thing I'm most concerned about in game to preserve. And that's why I really want to emphasize as little angle shooting as possible. Absolutely no lying. Like, I want to play an infinite game, right? Where I can play the same game with the same three people. If I never play with anyone else, that's fine. And I want to have positive games every time. Not only because it's more fun that way for me, but also because, like you're saying, trust can be maintained throughout games. And the best player is not decided by who got you, it's by who you actually played the game the best. And I think that's the true relation or true expression of skill. Secondarily, lying is fine. It's not part of the rules. You can do it if you want to. Angle shooting is also fine. What I think is that in my mind, they're the same. If I angle shoot someone or if I lie to them, I damage the relationship. And it doesn't really matter if I went by the letter of the deal, the nature of the deal. The end result is that I lose trust and they feel bad and our relationship is damaged. That's all factual. And so I don't want to create those scenarios ever. That's why playing straight up, playing, with honor or playing by some sort of moral compass or code is, I think, really important in cEDH. And it's something that, I don't really think people touch on quite enough. But that's my whole spiel about relationships. So I'm glad we touched here first.
Yeah, I love I love that you said that. I think it puts, honestly, I love cEDH content. I listen to your podcast. I listen to others, but it kind of puts the whole dialogue to rest is exactly what you just said, which is, people shouldn't be thinking about it as, did I cross the line where now someone's going to rant about me on Twitter?
Yeah.
It's not about that, right? And by the way, people ranting about it on Twitter, that means the system is working,
yes.
Right? Because same thing in business, if you have unethical business practices, people are going to post a negative review. People are going to hear about it, right? And people are going to be less likely to want to do business with you. The parallels are there, right? It's cut and dry. And so that's the first thing you need to think about is not just what relationship you want to have, but what do I have now? If I'm sitting down at a table, okay, Kevin and I know each other. I'm going to be able to negotiate things with Kevin that I may not be able to negotiate with someone that I've just met. And I have to take that into account. Like telling Kevin to go screw himself, I'm not going to give him back his wish claw in top 4.
And me saying, screw me, no, screw you, I'll kill myself before you activate it.
No one gets this wish claw. Yeah.
All right. So that one is really cut and dry. It's, arguably the most important. So the next one, this is really interesting, is interests. And so the concept is every negotiation is not a zero-sum game. And granted, a game of cEDH as a whole is zero-sum. One person wins, right? Or there's a draw or what have you. But every negotiation is not necessarily zero-sum. At least these aren't. And there's an opportunity to create value. And being able to understand what the other party's interests are and express your own gives you the opportunity for interesting deal making. Like a really classic example that has come up for me many times is I kept a imp seal hand and I'm in third seat and seat 2 plays a Ragavan. And I'm like, well, shit, there goes my entire game plan. Now what do I do, right? That creates a window for negotiation. This actually happened to me at Royal Rumble last year, not this past one, but the previous year, where I was in third seat, kept an M-Seal hand. Eric DeVoe played a Ragavan turn 1, and I'm like, well, shit. On his turn 2, he went to go cast Rhystic Study, and I had a Force of Will. And I go, Eric, here's the thing. I have an M-Seal. I need to cast this M-Seal. I don't want to threaten you, but I will not Force of Will your Rhystic Study if you, don't swing the Ragavan. Let me M-Seal turn 2. I'm already behind because I lost a turn, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, he agreed, even though we could argue whether or not I would have actually Force of Willed his Rhystic Study. You can have that whole debate. But that's an example of creating value because he's interested in keeping his Rhystic Study. I'm interested in being able to cast M-Seal so I can get back into the game and us making that deal. Just a simple example. You can think of a million more, but it comes down to sharing what my interests are, understanding what his interests are, and making a deal.
I think there's an upside down to interests as well that a lot of cEDH players culturally, I don't want to say obsess over because it's almost a subconscious thing in my own opinion. I think that that's specifically risk threshold because Interests, I think most people can sit down at the table and know what their interests are for the more or less. There's small things that can be noted and that really very much add up. Make no mistake. But then the opposite part of that, which is almost like an instinctive or vibe-based decision, is actually risk threshold. Like, okay, if I give Kyzr this imp seal in this exact same example, maybe his opponent, Eric DeVoe, is thinking this of, if I give him the imp seal, how much danger does that actually pose? Especially if it's an Imperial Seal, just getting him back into the game, opportunity cost seems very low, right? So I think that like sometimes just like you don't always have to push in the negotiation piece to sound political in that I have your best interests, I have your best interests. That actually sounds more political, doesn't it? Rather than we can actually reach a non-dangerous outcome that puts myself where I would like to be without any damage to you. So
like so well said. Right. I left that out, but obviously both of our interests is not losing the game. So like you have to, you have to also, but I've seen that. I've seen some of the best players do this where let's say their win attempt has been stopped, but they need some spell to resolve. Kevin, I've seen you do this where you will say, okay, like let this resolve. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what I'm going to do with this, or here's why. And you'll even sometimes explain, here's why I want this spell to resolve, right? And when people understand, okay, this person's interest is not winning the game at this time, but, maybe they need to be set up for a flash speed win later and, well, shit, we're all set up with our flash speed win, so might as well, or whatever. But case in point, like, yes, you have to evaluate that interest against, is there a mutual interest there?
See, me personally, I only have interest in my opponent's best outcomes. Just that's right.
By the way, Zach, the third one actually speaks to your example in top 4, which is options, right? And so what I don't see people doing very, very often is introducing other options, right? As a way to sort of enrich the negotiation. And so what you did in that example is you added an option, right? Now, I would argue the way that played out probably wasn't what the other players wanted, but nonetheless, like you created that scenario because you introduced another option that, for people to consider rather than just we lose to Andy, which let's face it, everyone's lost to Andy at some point, some more than others.
Hey, I live right next to him.
Shots taken. And again, we can relate all of these things to really phenomenal politicers, right? Like when we look at, I'll circle back real quick. Negotiators, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna have to keep remembering that one. And please correct me every time I say politics. Interests. People make deals all the time and are unsure but just confused why they don't resolve. And I'm like, did you offer anything to your opponent? Or did you just ask for something? And they're like, well, I just wanted my Rhystic Study to resolve. I'm like, okay, but why would anyone let that happen if they're not gaining something? The first thing I want to think about when I make a deal is what's in it for me from my opponent's point of view, right? Yeah. And it's what Evan does phenomenally. People call him the Freedom Waffle Casino, right? Because he's creating opportunities that are 51-49, where you're getting 49%. Like you're getting a lot, but he's getting 2% more. And that 2% stacks up over games.
And by the way, that's why Evan's able to successfully negotiate agreements, because he is aware and mindful of not just his interests, and he expresses what his interests are. He's above board with it, but he's mindful of the other person's interests. Like a really good example was our top 4 game at Royal Rumble last year. And Evan, I think he went for a Tezzeret. And Maddie mystical tutored for interaction to stop it, right? Because he's playing Kinnan. And so Evan says, okay, how about this, right? I'll let the Tezzeret resolve. I will -4 it or whatever. So it will die and I'll get a Mox Opal, okay? I want you to go ahead and get that piece of interaction and I want you to have it, like keep the interaction. And he even convinced her to get a Force of Negation, not a Force of Will, which there's that 51-49. That is just a little bit worse against Kinnan and a little bit better against everybody else. And so Maddie didn't have to blow her piece of interaction on what effectively was a 4-mana Mox Opal, which like none of us are countering a 4-mana Mox Opal, right? Yeah. And Evan squeezed out just that little bit more value, knowing that that piece of interaction is never going to hit him.
Yeah.
It was great. Like I thought it was a masterclass in understanding interests, introducing options, and negotiating an agreement. And meanwhile, I was in C4 and my fish had just got misstepped. So, you know, I was just screwed no matter what. But it was fun to watch.
Yeah, yeah. And the options piece, I think, is also super important, and it factors a lot into creativity, right? Options. Let's think about a Consecrated Sphinx. On face value, my Consecrated Sphinx can do insane things. But there is also a world where I say, I'm only going to draw 2 cards every turn cycle. I'll decline my triggers for any other additional ones outside of the first, you know, person to draw their cards. You could go up to 6, right? For everyone's draw step, I'll draw 2. And they're like, no, that's too good. And you're like, okay, how about 4 cards every turn cycle? And they're like, no. And you're like, okay, how about 2 cards? 2 cards a turn cycle is better than no cards a turn cycle. And that those options are created by creative negotiation.
Can we play a little game? I had this debate with Kevin. Kevin, I have a feeling we're about to say the same thing. Is this the necro? How many cards are you going to let me necro for every turn cycle? Is that what you're about to say?
Oh, no, I was about to take it completely somewhere else.
Thought experiment. I'm just curious because I've been in this scenario many times. Put a necro on the stack. Somebody's got a force of will. They don't want to use the force of will in necro, and I'm like, all right, how about you just let me refill my hand every turn or whatever? Like, I believe that's too good. What's the number? What's the number where you let a necro resolve? How many cards can they necro every turn where you're like, all right, you can have it? I'm curious. I have a number in my
context.
head.
I was going to mention, like, are there heuristic studies on board? Are we assuming no other draw engines are on board?
That's a good point. Let's assume no other draw engines. Let's assume it's like
turn 2 necro. Yeah, turn 1 necro.
Sure. 0. No, kidding. I think there's a staircase thing that has to happen in this conversation. You start high, they come low, you meet in the middle. Okay, we're just talking about the final number, correct?
You offer the offer that I always see get thrown out is I'll never go up past 7. I'll just refill my hand to 7 every turn. A good player will say, "Screw you!" Like no way, right?
That's 5 more cards than everyone else is drawing.
What's the number that you land on? I'm curious because this is I've had a few of these. And I've been given 7, and I've won every single one of those games.
Yeah, 7.
I've agreed to 3, and it just didn't feel good enough.
No, it's 4.
It's 4, right?
It's 4.
That's what
I actually think it's 2 to 3.
No, it's too little because your other opponents at the table are also going to be developing their own value engines or win conditions. 4 cards is it there's something almost poetic about it because it's like if you think about it, they're skipping their draw step, so it is effectively 3. They're getting 1 draw for their own turn and 1 draw for everyone else's turn. That just somehow feels fair.
It's just beautiful math.
Sorry to like derail this, but
I think it's interesting. I think 4 is still too many though. Honestly, like. Before we move on,
I know you swan song my necro on 4, but do you force of will necro for 4?
Good, yeah, it's a good question. I think in game I might settle on 4 if they're able to negotiate with me in a smart enough way. But I will say 2. I will if I have the force of will. I'm like, you can have 2 cards a turn, and they're like, I just can't do 2. Like just force of will the necro.
Yeah.
All right, so then this is a great opportunity because let's see. I'm gonna throw down the gauntlet, see if we can make it happen. See if we can negotiate some magic. Okay, so you need more in this deal for it to make sense for you. Your resource is not as valuable to you to keep in your hand as my resource is perceived by you to remain on the board at 4 cards per turn. Let's think about why. This is second level negotiation and peeling back layers and understanding where my opponent's interests actually are. So if we look at how many cards a player needs to draw and how much mana a player needs to win through a whole table, we're just making it a general assumption now that the whole table is not in a low resource state because that changes the math entirely, and then I'm the only villain at the table, right?
Yeah. This guy, he says he doesn't do math, but like we caught him.
I am a finance pro at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
continue.
Right. So and something that needs to be added is what my brain says as the Necropotence player, right? So finding what that something is may look very well like, okay, well, if I'm only drawing 4 cards per turn, the first player to resolve a heuristic study is going to very likely be drawing substantially more than myself. So how about we do this? I get 4 cards per turn, and I do not cast heuristic study this whole game.
Much more appealing deal.
I'm locking myself out of it. Like, that seems much more valuable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because then I'm not only getting 4+, which is the real, I think, terror of the card, or the effect of getting those additional 4, because I'm not paying mana, I'm paying life. Life is such a great resource, right? So maybe that's an example. Would you agree, though? I need to know if that would change your mind at all.
Kevin, I don't know if you are aware, but you just created the perfect segue into the 4th criteria for negotiation.
Secondly, I want to shout out Mana Vault Proxies. They're a US-based proxy company, and they help make this game more affordable so that you can play based on your skill level and not just the size of your wallet. I would not be playing this game if it weren't for proxies, so I love what Mana Vault is doing. They're even offering 5% off if you use the code SNACK at checkout. Without further ado, keep enjoying the video.
Which is called objective criteria, which is using objective facts, for example, such as number of cards drawn, to kind of bolster your point, which is exactly what you just did. Is now we're adding legitimacy to the deal so that it makes it more likely that they're going to accept it, which is, hey, like on top of it, I'm not going to cast heuristic study. I'm going to draw this many cards compared to, right? And so now that there's some objective criteria and what we're really evaluating is how many cards are you going to draw, it makes it more likely that we're going to reach an agreement. Like,
Agreed.
I think that's brilliant. I actually hadn't thought of that. I hadn't gotten past the, what's the number? But I think if I'm Zach and I'm going, no, like I don't want to let you get more than 2, which I don't think is enough, but let's say, and you're like, and I'm not going to cast heuristic, that probably changes my math. The other thing is just how badly do I want to hang on to this force of will, right? Like, you know, like I do not want to use, like for sure I do not want to use this force of will, right? So you're in a position where you know I don't want to use this, and it's not going to be hard to give me a reason to keep it.
That is true. It is. But the objective criteria do factor in pretty significantly. I guess this is part of negotiation, but in my side of the deal, if I have the force of will and I'm like in a low resource game, for example, like everyone mulled low, you're the only one that in theory has access to a draw engine like this early, even having 4 cards a turn is going to be more than the rest of the table. Because if I don't think the odds of a heuristic coming down are very high, like 4 cards a turn will beat everyone else. Like 4 cards a turn is a Tymna with 3 attacks. That's the same thing, right?
I agree, but I think what you're not factoring in is the reaction that the rest of the table will have. Like you're now kind of in a 3v1 scenario, and all you're getting is 4 cards a turn. 4 cards a turn does not outweigh the 3v1 scenario. I've actually seen this where we've made a necro deal, and it's, you know, whether it's 4 or 5, and then everyone's like kicking this poor guy in the balls. Yeah, they're like, you know, casting Bowmasters, they're swinging at them with Kinnons and Mana Dorks, and I've done this to Kevin, so I know.
I've got some good shit for you guys. Ready for this? Yeah. So this is actually what I wanted to talk about before we had this interesting chat about the 4-card necro, and that is another game theory application of, we spoke about it very briefly, I think previously, Zach, where it's vulture theory. Yeah. Vulture theory. If you can create a villain out of someone, you can do this while remaining silent while people are negotiating, not politicking, negotiating very heavily, right? And you could just be quiet for a full 2 minutes. And then when there's frustration being built because these two powers are not seeing each other eye to eye, you can very easily tilt the balance, create a villain, even if it's like hey, just let them have it, this for XY reason, then the emotion that's created in all this negotiating remains with the table for the rest of the game. So, or it, sometimes in other situations, back to the idea of the consecrated Sphinx we were just talking about, people hate that card. So you might also, as the silent player in this deal, want that force of will to be spent. You might want that force of will to be spent. So this ties into every single player in the pod. Back to the Necro example, in that as the Necro player, you can leverage this as well and double down on the objective criteria piece. You can say, all right, well, if you're going to be this respectful of my Necro, which thank you so much, what are your other opponents doing? Could you possibly get more value out of your own resource, sans myself involvement, I mean. So like, are you going to castristic fish? Are you going to castristic fish? Are you going to castristic fish? Yes. If it's no to all, then we begin to play the guessing game, and all of a sudden the fear is just being reduced like automatically on this 4-card Necro.
But like, this is actually, I'm glad this went here, because this kind of really brings to life, in my opinion, this whole topic of negotiation and deal making and how this happens. Like, and whether you've made a handshake deal, which is like, I'll do this if you do this, or I won't do this if you do this. Even without a deal, everything effectively is a deal, right? Like all of your communication is, in some ways an implicit sort of deal. There's 3 more, and they get pretty important. The next one is, so have you guys ever heard the term BATNA?
Like Batman?
BATNA. It's an acronym.
Oh,
it's a negotiating. No. It's a negotiating. If you read any book on negotiation or you take a class on it, it stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is if we don't make this deal, what's your alternative, right? And it is so important when you're negotiating with someone to not only know what your alternative is. So like, if we don't make this deal, what happens to me? But what is their alternative? And so like Kevin, our like wish claw example, the reason I knew that you're giving me the wish claw no matter what is because your alternative is giving it to someone who's way more dangerous than me, right? Like I'm using a really, really simple example to prove the point, but understanding what the alternative is and being able to articulate it, even tell maybe someone that you're talking to, let's face it, like cEDH players are not trained, skilled negotiators, right? So they're not going to go in and go, okay, well, what is my BATNA in this case? And they're going to evaluate it. You may have to tell them, right, what their BATNA is, and you may have to do it respectfully so that you don't come across as condescending or what have you. But that is going to help make a deal. And then you understand if somebody's back is up against a corner, is your back up against a corner, but understanding that helps you negotiate.
Yeah, alternatives are super interesting, right? Like, and it's very relational, right? Because you're taking the deal outside of the context of just the deal, and you're saying, let's zoom out, right, and understand where we're at in the game overall. If I force a will this Necro, the alternative is if I don't make this deal with you and I do force a will it, I could lose to the next person, right? So I need to consider what are the other options at play. Often this is a skill or a tactic I will use, right? If I am going to counter something, I know I'm going to counter it. I will offer to the table, I'll say, hey guys, I'll use my piece here if I can see your hands, because I don't want to just lose to the next person. And they're like, oh yeah, here you go. And then it's like, boom, free information. I was already going to counter it.
Exactly, yeah. Then you got a whole bunch of free information. Yeah, because you evaluated the alternative of you not using that piece of interaction is way worse.
Yeah. I do think that there's like a very much like a balance to how many times you can actually use that card. It's almost like your utility belt runs out of gas with some of these types of moves, because once a pattern is established, then the negotiation runs quite dry quite quickly. So sometimes I've got a good example here actually where I was maximizing resources at a locals. I was up against
what you call it.
What?
Maximizing resources.
Yeah, you pup stomping son of a bitch. All right, yeah, please.
I lost this game. I'm telling you why. Okay, so there was an arena rector that came down. It was like Rocco, one of the Hulk decks. It was actually Ian Samuel, super cool guy. Yeah. So anyway, but he very early, it's top 4 early. The rector comes down. We're freaking out, trying to figure out how to survive. We're doing all this stuff. So the table figures out that we have a way to get this bounced. I'm playing Rogsai. I'm able to mystical tutor instead of for a win, get a wheel because there's other interaction, while us as the players on the back foot in that 3v1 position, we're trying to figure out how we can negotiate with each other to just reach survival simply. So what I tried to do here, one of the players showed me an offer you can't refuse. it was their only interaction piece. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and mystical tutor for a Wheel of Fortune. That this way we don't die. I was on a lower mold too, by the way. So we reach agreement, mystical tutor, hold priority. I'm going to pact my own mystical tutor, and I need you to offer my pact, because I'm not going to just use my own resources for nothing. So the next guy that has the offer has to think about this really, like, oh man, I know for a fact that I'm dead to this Hulk that's coming through the Rector, or I could just let this Rogsai kill himself and then still lose, like, what am I, like, what position? I put him in such a bad position that his choice actually did end up offering the pact, but the cost was the relationship at the table. Yeah. Because for the rest of the game, of course, Ian Samuel, the Hulk player, is like, "What? How are you gonna let this guy do this to you?" And immediately, I'm just like the number one villain. Nothing I do resolves. Right? Yeah. So the bridges do get burnt. I feel like sometimes. Yeah. I think there's an extreme sensitivity, though, specifically with the whole "show me your hands, show me your resources, otherwise I'm not interacting." Because like,
you got to keep in mind, like. Here's the thing, like, we're approaching this very logically, but we're human beings. Like, we're all very emotional animals, right? And like, you also have to be able to like observe when someone has just had their fill. And some of the really, like, I'm gonna say his name. Like, I'm gonna call out Wounded Satellite, Max, who I've known for a long time. One of his downfalls is not being able to identify when people just can't take anymore, right? Yeah. And then you have those scenarios. So like, all the negotiating in the world isn't going to do you any good if someone's just had enough.
Yeah, they say the alternative is death, and I am going to choose that because fuck you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, like, I ran into the same exact person who, for whatever reason, I've convinced decided he didn't like me and just blew me out of top 16 in Crit League 2 months in a row. Because he didn't care about winning. He just wanted to make sure I didn't win. And it's like, that sucks, right? But then I had to evaluate, like, what did I do at what point to get him, right? Like, clearly I have some responsibility there. Maybe not in that game, but earlier on. I still don't know what it was, but nonetheless,
Well, I think one part of this, and Kevin, you're right, like, you have to be careful about what you're saying to other people, and when people get to the point where they're like, I don't care anymore. I don't care what you say. I'm not listening to you. And I think one piece of advice I would offer is don't put people in between a rock and a hard place, because cornered animals fight the hardest and they also don't give a fuck. Instead, offer, like we said, options. Say like, hey, could I see your hand because I'm scared that you might win after this? And they could be like, no, I'm not going to show you my hand. And then you can downgrade your ask and you can be like, okay, super reasonable. Are you going to push on your next turn, right? If I counter this spell and I use this piece of interaction, are you going to push? And if you come from it in a very like reasonable way, you're not just like, show me your hand or I will counter the spell. Like you have a much higher chance of being able to seem reasonable, logical, and like someone that they can work with and they want to work with throughout the rest of the game.
So this is, Zach, this is actually a perfect segue, what you just said.
No way.
Running up. No,
keep banger after banger.
I know. So there's two more, which is commitment, which like I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on, which is just, are both sides able to commit to the deal? Is it clear? Is it implementable? Like, I won't draw this, right? Like, which is why, like, I try to avoid the I won't push. I'm not going to win the game. Well, if I draw the perfect card, I try to avoid those types of scenarios. But the last one, and I actually want to call out Nastrom, is communication, which is how effectively are you able to communicate? Are you able to listen? Are you able to speak clearly? Like, Zach, your point, the reason you're able to kind of walk somebody back off the ledge who is clearly like back against the wall, cornered animal, and get a deal out of them when they're about ready to say F you to everybody, is because you're able to communicate with them effectively. That's where I see a lot of this stuff break down, because let's face it, like, we're Magic players. Magic players are famously not the most charismatic individuals, and many have trouble communicating. I just, that's no offense to like the the bite-sized MTG audience here.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's I always, and I've said this before, but like my mom's a psychotherapist. I spent my entire life trying to be introspective and think about how I'm feeling and how other people are feeling. And I think it's a huge boon to playing cEDH because like so much of politics negotiation comes down to it was what I'm saying getting across. Because I could be thinking something, and a lot of pitfalls that people fall into is that everyone thinks that everyone else thinks about the world the same way they do. And it is so deeply not true. And so if I can't like put myself in someone else's shoes, if I can't exhibit empathy, I'm not going to be able to communicate effectively. I might be the smartest person in the world, but if I can't get my point across, it doesn't even matter.
For sure, exactly. And so a lot of people, when they hear negotiation, think we're haggling over a car at a car dealership.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, I guess you're negotiating. Like, that's the simplest form of negotiation. But like, I can already tell you where you're probably going to end up because there's a zone of possible agreement. You're going to land somewhere in there and like, whatever. But I negotiate multiple $100 million deals for a living. Mm-hmm. And the same principles that I use to negotiate those deals, I use at a cEDH table, which to me is hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's true. That's why I'm saying, however you feel about politics and like whatever like term you want to use to assign to what we do at a cEDH table, the skill is highly transferable.
It is. And I love the way that you're drawing the correlation to the car salesman thing or ideology, because I think this is also what we were sort of talking about, where I think a lot of like people have referred to it as like the bad actors or whatnot, or a complaint around politics in cEDH is that it feels like gaslighting. So when things are not being done, when all 7 steps are not being applied at the right time, right place, or they're being worn out, it does feel cheap. But then the higher level salesmanship or negotiation skills, I think, is almost a guarantee if the other opponent is open to it. So,
well, yeah, I mean, the whole thing feels like gaslighting because at the end of the day, someone's going to win. So that's what's funny to me is you negotiate these deals along the way. You're able to see very quickly what the result of that negotiation was, right? Because somebody won and somebody didn't. But oftentimes it's, the deals that were made along the way are a part of it, and a part of it was someone's ability to calculate the odds and apply math, and some of it was application of game theory and what have you, right? But that's what makes it interesting, and that's what creates some of the bad feelings. Like, I play a lot with Blakey, who's in my opinion the best RAL pilot out there. No offense to all other RAL pilots. He hates playing with me. He hates playing with me because, in his words, I mind control everybody else to stop him. That's what he says. That's what he says. But I actually, conversely, I love playing with Blake because my win percentage is very high when Blake's at the table.
Because he does mind control everyone.
For that exact reason. Like, it's not hard because he's playing RAL and I just lean into it. But yeah, like it's such a relevant skill.
Yeah. Also, a quick note is the difference between like a good salesman and a bad salesman is bad salesman, you're being sold, right? You know that you're being probably gypped. Like, you don't really need to buy what they're selling you. And when you do buy it, it feels bad after. You're like, I don't know why I did this. Good salesmen align what your needs are with their product. And you feel great after because you're like, wow, I needed this in my life. You explained why I needed this, right? Yeah.
And especially, and Zach, this probably happened to you, but like you made a deal with somebody, it resulted in you winning the game, and they walk away and they go, I made the right deal. Like, good job on the win. I know you won, but like, I would have made that deal in hindsight.
Yes.
That's when like, firing on all cylinders, this worked as intended.
Absolutely. And that's the goal. Like, that, in my opinion, it should be our goal as cEDH players to walk away from every game with a positive attitude and say, like, I would have played with this game with the same people again. There was nothing in this game that made me feel like I was gotten or misled or gaslit. It all happened in a way that I enjoyed and that I thought was great. And I can come out of it learning new things and trying new things, but there's no regrets that come out of the game. And And because like ultimately we want to be playing this game as long as we can. We're not playing this game, to win a bunch of money and then to never play again, right? So I think it's absolutely possible to get to this place, and it just requires practice and understanding theory, and then applying it in games and really being self-aware of how you come across, talking to your opponents after the game, saying like, hey, did you feel good about how that went down? Did you feel like, there was angle shooting going on? Like, is there anything I could do better when I'm making deals? That's something I think people should definitely try to employ as much as they can.
Agree.
So we're at the end of this, but I wanted to recap and just make sure that we're giving people something to take away that's concrete. And we've talked about a lot of stuff. Like, this is definitely a very in-depth podcast, and I just want to make sure that we covered all of our bases and that we give people something to walk away with. So let's go one by one. We started off by talking about the cEDH skill equation, which is math, game theory, negotiation, and practice. These are maximizing your actions, predicting your opponent's actions, and influencing your opponent's actions. The first skill is math. It dives into basically understanding what your deck does to the highest level. So how do I win? What am I mulliganing for? What are my tutors, necros, gnaws, intuition piles? This is what I would say walking away from this is really understand your deck intimately. Like, practice a lot in Eldrazi Dev or on Moxo, whatever you prefer to use. I think Eldrazi Dev's the best. But practice your combos so that you have this on pat. This is probably the easiest skill to practice on your own, right? It's very hard to practice the other skills on your own. Game theory. There's a lot to go into game theory, and I think hopefully we can do another follow-up episode because I think there's a lot more that we could discuss.
Oh, yeah.
But the things we covered basically were the importance of game theory and the ideas of Bayesian probability, as well as the two classic fundamental game theory concepts, which are the prisoner's dilemma and mutually assured destruction. Again, Bayesian probability is you have subjective belief, so I believe something, I interpret new information, and then I update that belief. And that translates across a wide spectrum of calculations. The prisoner's dilemma is there's a discussion, i.e. multiple players, in a cEDH example, would be drawing cards into a smothering tithe. It's bad for both of them to do this, and yet they still do it because they're looking out for their selfish interests. Sometimes it's good to take a scenario where you might gain less, but overall, you're all better off. All boats rise, right, when the tide does.
You said that so perfectly. I'm so proud.
I appreciate it. I'm reading your notes. Mutually assured destruction. This is a situation where we are both engaged in a scenario where if we press the button, we both die, right? And some decks are built to capitalize on this. Some players are built to capitalize on this. Those are probably the best players in the world because they understand humans at a really core level, right? And then the last skill is negotiation. So like Dave said, everything from the minute we sit down, from the moment we shake hands and introduce ourselves to the times when we say, is that a clam chowder deck or a traditional Sisay deck, is negotiation, right? And all of these situations are information gathering opportunities, and they're super important. It's not like you have to be on at all times. Just know that when you're talking at a table with other players, you're negotiating, and you're definitely not politicking. The final piece is the Harvard framework for negotiation based on the book Getting to Yes, which is a great one to read if you're interested in really diving into negotiation in depth. We went over 7 principles. These are relationships, interests, options, legitimacy/objective criteria, alternatives, BATNA, commitment, and communication. So that is kind of the big wrap up of everything we talked about. And it's the Spark Notes if you just skip to the end. And I just want to say, is there anything else that we didn't cover, any clarifications we want to make, or any concrete things we could really give people to walk away with to,
Yeah, look, I would say, well, first of all, I know someone who went to Harvard is going to comment that I got something wrong.
Yeah.
Or some game theory professor, well, that's not exactly what Bayesian, please, comments, engage. I apologize if I misspoke in anything, but this was really just kind of Kevin and I taking some of our real world experience and knowledge and translating it to cEDH and back. And honestly, like Zach, I think you summarized it perfectly. But what I really wanted to get across to people is you're building valuable skills, and as you're thinking about where to apply them, either at the cEDH table or outside of the cEDH table, just know that they're valuable.
Yeah, put them on the resume.
Exactly.
Dang, I should have gone first. I didn't know I was going to have to follow both of those things up. If on the topic of negotiation, if all else fails, you can always leverage a beverage.
True. Leverage a beverage.
This is why Kevin is our beloved team captain right here.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you guys for coming on. Really, again, appreciate it. These are some of my favorite conversations because I learn a lot in them and I really enjoy doing them. It feels like the time flies, but we've been here for 2 hours. So thanks for everyone for sticking with us for this conversation. If you're still here, do you guys want to chat about anything that you're up to, anywhere where people can find you, talk about Zen, anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think especially some of our conversations, even in this chat, lit up portions of how the relationship aspect is so important. That's like one of the core philosophies of what Team Zenith or Zen really stands for, which is like treat one another great. We're here to have fun and let's keep it that way, right? So some exciting things happening is we're going to have a Teams event come at the Boyle in New Orleans. That'll be an exciting pre thing. We're doing Friday night. So if you're not going or if you are going, tune in. It'll be a good time. Support your teams because it's not just us. There's other players on the board, other pieces. It'll be a great time. So, and then also we're going to be at events basically all over East Coast, West Coast. I mean, all of the above. So cheers to that. Play cEDH.
Heck yeah.
Zach, I just want to add. So I'm trying my hand at TOing.
Oh, nice.
We're going to be putting on an event in Boston. We have to move the date because it coincides with Fishbowl. So I just talked to Hire about it. But it will be the first ever full team-based cEDH event where you register as a team of 4. Swiss is a combination of classic and two-headed giant. And the cut is actually team based. So more to come on that, but I would love your help to broadcast this once we get it rescheduled.
Absolutely. I will broadcast and I will be there because that sounds like so much fun.
Well, your ticket is covered by me, my friend.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. I think the idea of teams is fascinating, and I think it's a really cool evolution of cEDH. I know some people have concerns about collusion in teams, and I do believe like ultimately, while that's reasonable to have concerns about, it's all about us as players, and it comes down to be the change you want to see in the world, or whatever cheesy quote comes with it. If you want to see pro play be at the highest level with, ethics involved and morals involved, it's up to you as players and us as players to really exhibit that behavior and go about doing it in a positive way. So I'm super pumped about the future of cEDH, both in the teams aspect as well as everything else that's going on. I really think like it's in a very positive place. And again, doing these podcasts helps me believe, and I hope helps other people believe, like these are not problems. They are things that we're coming to and actively figuring out solutions to as we go. So I'm very like bullish on the future. I don't think it's a dark place, and I think the community is amazing. So
I agree. So well said.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay, sweet. Thank you guys. And thank you to everyone who's watching. I know this was a long one, but I do think it's one of the best, and I think we'll schedule a part 2 probably right now as soon as we wrap up and get more game theory. Maybe we go into Kevin's wheelhouse and look at sales and how that relates to cEDH. If you guys have any questions, if you have any comments, if there's anything that, we didn't do correctly, or if there's more information you're curious about, please comment. We want to know. We want to make this better. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we're all open to feedback as long as it's positive, even if it's, constructive criticism.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. This was awesome.
Absolutely.
Heck yeah.
Sweet. All right. Bye for now, everybody.
Bye.
Huge thanks to both VarrakS and Kyzr for joining me today. This is one of my favorite kinds of videos to do, which really focus on theory. If you guys liked it, let us know in the comments down below. If there's any questions you had during the video that came up that we didn't cover, make sure to ask those, and anything that we can do better. We're really always open to input, and so we want to make the channel the best it can be. All right, it's giveaway time. Last week's winner won a Japanese foil Smothering Tithe by Doot Loot. Total grail in my opinion. This is my favorite art for Smothering Tithe, and I love foreign cards, and they're provided for free. So this person won because they were the first person to call dibs on the card, and I gotta respect the rule of dibs. But anyway, huge shout out to Doot Loot for being able to provide this prize for free. Doot Loot does these kind of giveaways on his Discord all the time, and it is the only place I will ever shop for foreign cards. He has them amazingly sourced. He has foreigns, he has foils, obviously, he's got signed cards, he's got artist proofs, he's got everything under the moon when it comes to making a beautiful Magic deck. So if you haven't already, go check him out. He does giveaways as well. Let's look at what this week's giveaway is going to be. So in honor of Kyzr, who plays Scion of the Ur-Dragon, I wanted to give away one of their decks. So you can win a Mana Vault Proxies Scion of the Ur-Dragon deck. All you have to do is comment the word dibs in this week's comments. Make sure you're liked and subscribed to the channel, and you might just be walking away with a Scion of the Ur-Dragon deck to go and pilot yourself to victory. Finally, reach out to me if you're interested in cEDH coaching. I've won last year's Invitational, I top 16 this year's midseason, and I'm almost qualified, I think, for this final end of year Invitational. Fingers crossed there. If you're interested in walking this path and playing tournament EDH, if you're just getting into EDH or cEDH, please reach out to me. I've loved coaching, and it's just been phenomenal to connect with players and see them get better, grow, and get to chat about the game we all love. So you can reach out to me on Discord at snack5322, on Twitter, comment on this video, however you can get a hold of me, we'll figure it out and we'll put together a plan to do coaching one-on-one. That's going to be it for this week's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.